Hello, hello, hello. We are Auratein Dil Se Desi, a podcast for brown women by brown women. This is your host, Geet. Welcome to season 2 of Auratein. This season's episodes will be focused on topics that were submitted to us by you guys, the listeners. We've got some amazing guests and some really great topics lined up. I want to take a moment to thank all of those women who have taken the time out to come on the show to discuss some topics that at times have been difficult. We are honored that you are allowing us to share your story. In today's episode, we discuss the India-Pakistan partition through the Sindhi lens. Our guests for today's episodes are Sunaina Paul and Beena Server. Sunaina is the author of the book Refugees in Their Own Country, a collection of poems about the partition based on conversations Sunaina had with her chacha, her only connection to Sindh, the land of her forefathers. Beena Server, a renowned journalist and activist, is founder and curator of the South Asia Peace Action Network and can be found at www.southasiapeace.com. Beena was also editor of Aman Ki Asha, a joint initiative between Jung News Pakistan and Times of India to foster peace between the two countries. Aman Ki Asha is also how Beena and I met, which we will discuss during today's episode. The India-Pakistan partition is very close to my heart and is part of the story that I tell myself. And with that thought, let's start today's episode. In August 1947, when India finally won its independence from the British Raj after a struggle of almost 300 years, it left behind in its wake a nation divided into two states, Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. Immediately, there began one of the greatest migrations in human history, and one that is the least discussed in the West. Growing up, it was a paragraph at best, grossly misrepresenting a monumental crux of the South Asian identity. Across the subcontinent, people who had coexisted for centuries attacked each other, Hindus and Sikhs on one side, and Muslims on the other. There are endless stories of families separated, women and children slaughtered, people pushed out of their homes, abandoned in refugee camps, with nowhere to go in an unknown land. My maternal grandmother lived through the partition and throughout her life shared stories with me about where she was born and her childhood home, in a faraway land known as Sindh. At the time, it sounded like some faraway place I would never visit. According to Nani's passport, she was born in 1921. At the time of partition, that would have made her approximately 25 years old. I say approximately because her birth records could never be found in Sindh. The Sindhi identity is perhaps the largest collateral damage of partition. Sindhis migrated to India, to the Hindu Rashtra, with no state to call their own. They left behind their beloved Sindhu Darya and were removed from it forever. Some will argue that this displacement proved fruitful. With no attachments to the new land, they were free to move around the world, which they did, and went about creating a new identity as successful business tycoons, spinning their fortunes from nothing. But did that leave them with a fractured identity? Is peace in South Asia possible? Is it time for a narrative change? Hello, Arte.
Hello, Ate.
Hello, Arte.
Hello, Orte.
Hello, Arte.
What motivated you to document the Sindhi partition story in the way that you have?
It was COVID and midlife crisis combined. I was watching this movie about Kashmiri Pandits, and in the end of the movie, the guy, he goes back to his ancestral home. And that's where the movie ends. And something just hit my heart. And I was like, even if I want to, and somehow I am able to go back to Sindh, how will I know where to go? My chacha passed away. My dad passed away. There's nobody left in my family who could, my grandparents were like long gone. And who will tell me where to go? It is recently that I came to know that I'm related to Bhagwanti Navani. Before that, I didn't even know that much about my own roots. And that at that time, obviously, I didn't know about the Bhagwanti Navani part, but I realized that I cannot go back. And I always thought that I would be able to go back one day. And I just wanted to see that home and, play under the trees where so my eldest chacha, my dad's eldest brother, he used to stay with us and he used to take care of me. My mom and dad were both super busy trying to earn money and, get back the status they have known that Sindhis used to stay in. So he used to tell me stories about Sindh, and he used to tell me that we'll go there one day. And I used to say, yes, we'll go there one day. And he passed away in 2018, I think. Yeah, 2018. And this was in 2020 when I was seeing this movie, and I was like, wow, I can't go back. I don't know where to go. And the poem he told me came to me. And something changed. I don't know what it was or how it even started, but I just kept writing poems. I am a poet. I have been writing poems professionally since 2014. And before that, it was just, अच्छा आज कुछ अच्छा नया आया तो लिख दिया ऐसा. But it was never like profession. It was never thinking with an end in mind. It all happened after 2014. So when these poems came and they kept coming, it was like something in my heart, it pierced and the blood kept seeping out and something kept happening. Like I still cannot explain it, but it happened. And that is how I ended up with so many poems that I was like, where to publish, what to do with this that has come? Like, do I modify it to fit into some refugee book? Like, what do I do? And somehow, my cousin keeps telling me, Didi, you should speak in Sindhi. Didi, you teach your kids Sindhi. And I was like, this generation, maybe it is ready to reconnect somewhere. If my cousin, who is a Mumbaikar like me, if he's reconnecting, if he feels this urge, and if I am feeling this urge too, maybe there are more people who would be. And I researched, like, is there somebody publishing Sindhi poems or Sindhi stuff? And that is when Saz Agarwal's name came out. And I promptly sent her a mail. She promptly replied, and in less than a year, the book came out. It was very fluid, like how Geet mentioned that you have come at the right time. This is the third time someone's telling me that it's happening at the right time, and I think something is happening, and hence that this book has come. That is how I personally see it. Like, if 2 years back somebody would have told me that, Sunena, you would be doing this podcast on this, I would have laughed. I have tried to, I don't remember who said this, but they said that they thought it was a compliment if someone looked at them and said, hey, you don't look like a Sindhi. And I have felt that too. All through my life, if someone's like, oh, so where are you from? I'm like, yes. And they are like Bengali and Tamilian and, like it goes crazy. And most of them end with North India. And I'm like, no, go further east. And that is when, go further west. And that is when they are like, oh, okay, you're from Pakistan. I'm like, that's everyone's faced it at some point. Like, still, even in staying in America, and people are like, oh, you're from Pakistan. Because in India, nobody knows, okay, Sintha, hardly anybody knows it.
I feel like that's one of the biggest tragedies of the Sindhi identity, that we don't have a state in India, and that creates kind of like a, I don't know, an orphan child almost.
I know. Recently, there was this Ranveer Singh's Sindhi intro to Kiara Advani. I don't know if you guys got a chance to see it. And that was being made fun of. But people were like, at least usne Sindhi to boli. Kisi ko pata to chala Sindh ke baare mein. So I was like, yeah, okay. But the way he said it, it came out wrong. I personally didn't like it at all.
Who is this?
Ranveer Singh, the Bollywood actor.
Oh, yeah. The fact that he was doing the Sindhi accent. I saw that on like some show.
Yes. Yeah.
Sunena, I had a quick question for you. So when you're writing your poetry and when you've written your poetry, has it been in Sindhi? Has it been in English?
No, this is one thing that I'm working upon. I'm not very fluent in Sindhi. So writing is like, would be a very big, I told my mom, let's translate these poems in Sindhi. She said, "Beta, tujhse nahi hone wala. Tu rehne de." Yeah, these are all in English.
Now that you've written the book, do you feel like this was something that had been in the back of your mind all along, and it felt like
Never. That is what 2
Okay.
years back, if you would have told me that this podcast will be about this Sindhi book, I would have laughed, I swear. I have never thought of myself as like Sindhi in the sense that, I should write something about Sindh. All since 2014, I've been writing about nature or motherhood or relationships and, stuff like this. Never about being a second, third generation refugee or none of this has ever so basically why does a writer write? It is when something's changed their equilibrium. Kuch to hoga na, that it will make you feel either too happy or too sad, and that is when something will come out.
Something overwhelming that sort
Yes.
of happens. Yeah, sure.
So hence for me Sindh was like okay, it was okay, it didn't change me in any way. My motherhood changed me, my relationships have changed me, friendships have changed me, but never this was when that movie happened, and I realized I can't go back. Something has happened after that day.
Yeah. And it's really interesting too that all of us identify with the partition and we identify with this specific ethnic tribe we are also part of in Pakistan, right? Because हमेशा ये होता है, बात होती है partition की, and it's like, oh, हम Hyderabadi hain, हम Sindh. Like there is this like deeper layer to the partition that we always mention, but we don't talk about.
I feel like it's the deeper layer to our identity, and we negate partition. Like we negate that, all of that experience and losses today, and we talk about an identity that almost no longer exists. It's not really a part of our reality anymore. Like if I say Sindhi, people still, similar, very similar. We were talking about this. Growing up for me was like I grew up as an American, and the first person that I would ever talk to would ask me, we're Indians, right? And the Indians would ask me like, so where in India are you from? And then it's like, oh, I'm from Bombay. Then the identity becomes, oh, are you Maharashtrian? No. Okay, so then where are you from? And I'm like, Bombay. And then when they push further, then eventually I'm like, well, my forefathers are from Sindh. Oh, so you're Pakistani. No, I'm not Pakistani.
There you go.
But that's what it comes down to. And so there is that we all feel like refugees in our own country. We all feel like orphan children in our own country, even though we're Indian. Are we Indian? Because we don't have a state to like identify with. And there is some sort of a disconnect because everybody that you go and visit in India, other than your immediate family members, everyone kind of looks at you like, so where you're from, So I totally recognize that. I recognize that. I recognize that part of our identity. So Sunena, in more reflection or introspection, because we all of us, I guess, at some point, once we're over the hump of doing something big and creative the way that you did, and embarking on this adventure, we don't really know what the end result is going to be until some time has passed. So, and I'm still learning a lot of my end results of like the experiences that I've had. So what are some things that you feel you have learned from the deep dive into yourself and your Sindhi identity?
I was very surprised to know, though it is not a shock, but it was a surprise to know that people didn't actually migrate in 1947. Like immediately when the whole thing was happening, it was very calm in Sindh at that time because it was told that Hindus would stay here. Wherever Hindus are, they'll stay there. And wherever Muslims are, they'll stay there. There's no need for anything. It is, and it seems, I may be wrong. I'm not a historian. I've just read stuff and I know stuff. So I haven't really researched this. But I've been told that 6th December is when the actual riots happened. And before that, it was very minor here and there. But it wasn't like what happened on 6th of December. And after that, people migrated, and the bloodshed, though it was there, it was pretty less compared to the rest of the refugees. So this something...
the bloodshed of Sindhis you're talking about, like the bloodshed in Sindh.
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Versus on the other. I've heard and read the same thing.
Yes. But I really didn't know that before this book. I had no idea. I just assumed it was the same. It was the same madness everywhere. But I'm so happy to read that it was less. And it was delayed because they really thought they could stay there. And it was only when, people from this side went to that side and they realized that, hey, hello, we need houses, go. And that is when things happened.
Yeah. So that's one thing, that you realize that it was a lot more peaceful than you've been taught or learned. Were there any other things that you think?
Like every other culture, Sindh also has its own beautiful culture, but it is so lost. I know this is not a new thing. Anybody who knows little bit also, I'm like a 2-year-old when it comes to Sindhi culture. So even if somebody knows little bit, they know about the Jhumir, they know about Chheja, and if people who have stayed in Sindhi communities like Ulhasnagar or Thane, like my cousins, they know everything. They've not felt like they are not a Sindhi. And for them, it's normal because they've grown up with people around them who are Sindhis and everything was pretty normal for them. But for me, everything was like new. Acha, aisa bhi hota
What
hai?
is the two things that you mentioned? Jumit and Chaja? What are they? Can you
Jhumir is a
explain?
dance and Chheja is also a dance. I think Chheja is done mostly by men, if I'm not wrong. I don't remember these minute things, but yeah, it's something like that. So, and there are many, many things like Ajrak. I didn't know Ajrak, the block painting, was made in Sindh. I've always loved Ajrak. I had no idea it is made in Sindh. I'm like, no wonder. Okay, there is some. So, like my cousin's dad passed away when that cousin was like 2 or 3 years old. And, I see him like maybe once in 3-4 years. So when I saw him last time, he was sitting just the way his dad used to sit. And he's extremely smart, which is okay, but how did he know at 2 years of age, how did his dad sit? And he sat exactly like that. So there is some connection, right? So similarly, I never realized I was connected to Sindh. I like that stamped paintings and dupattas. I love cotton dupattas. And I didn't know Ajrak was Sindh at all. I've been looking for it, but I didn't realize it was Sindh. And then later I realized, Achha, ye to Sindh hai. Oh, no wonder. So many small things that, and the culture, yeah. So like, I really wish there was some part of Sindh that could have or can still maybe something can happen. And if somehow that culture could sustain, but there's a pessimistic side of me who says, but who's going to go and stay there now? Nobody's going to leave their house and stay there. Will it actually work out? I don't know all this. Like if somebody will ask me, will you go and stay there? I'm like, no, I cannot leave my family just for this, right? I'm not going to do that. But if it could happen, if the culture could sustain, I would feel nice.
But I think you guys, there is sustenance going on in terms of the people. Even though that they may not be in Sindh anymore, and
it is so diluted.
Right. But the fact that you and Geet are here and you are exploring your Sindhi identity, you too are carrying that forward, right? Like, you may not be able to go live in the country or live in the area, but you can, Sindh still lives in you.
It does.
As cheesy as that sounds.
Even, and the funny thing is, even if you don't accept it, or like, I know people who are like, hey, don't, like, I'll tell my friends or someone, can you please forward my poems? Please put it on your stories on Insta. They're like, hey, please, I don't want to identify myself as a Sindhi. I'm like, dude. So, but even though they are not, they still are, right? It won't change. So,
I think that's also a little bit our fault. And by our fault, I don't mean you and me personally. I think it's us as Sindhis. I think it's Sindhis' fault too. We got so busy in survival mode.
Yes.
That we let the culture kind of slip through the fingers. The loss and the trauma that resulted from partition, which is something that, again, we have not talked about. I mean, Amna and I and Sami were talking about this just recently, where we were like, how much trauma, and I'm talking about like as a group, how much trauma have we gone through as a people on both Indian and Pakistani sides as a result of partition? I mean, we've started talking about now health and like obesity and diabetes as a result of the famine that we faced and how that impacts our overall health generations later. The same question I have, that how does it impact us as far as psychological trauma? Because we all know that it changes your baseline biochemistry, right? But we've always, so this is a very big thing that I like to focus on, and I think that it has a lot to do with us letting it slip through our fingers, or feeling pressured by being called spy or being called whatever, and we kind of just let that identity go and try to assimilate more into wherever it is that we're living. Like, a lot of my cousins and friends and family refuse to speak the language because they're like, well, what's the purpose? I mean, I need to assimilate. I live in America. Like, who cares if I'm speaking Sindhi or not? Like, what is that going to do for me? So I think it's partially a fault of ours too. So we're going to now turn over to Bina, who I met through Aman Ki Asha. And we're just going to jump right into the first question that we have.
But before you do that, can I just respond to a couple of things that Sunaina said that touched me? Because what Sunaina said about not having the land, I have felt that as somebody who's from the other side, as somebody whose family came from Pratapgarh and Allahabad and Mandiri and those kind of places to Karachi and Lahore, and I was labeled, and our families, we are labeled as Muhajirs, and I think sometime when I moved to Lahore in the 80s, I realized how important land is, where your ancestors are from, because in Karachi, it's a big melting pot, I guess, like New York, so nobody asks where you're from, kind of. But in Lahore, everybody asks where you're from, and everybody wants to know what your background is and all that, and magar piche se kidhar se hain, like that kind of thing. And that is when I think I realized, like that I don't have a land, that, and when I went to Allahabad for the first time, I feel your pain that, about not being able to go back, Sunaina, and not being able, it's not even like back because you've never been there, but it feels like coming home. It feels like when I went to Allahabad as an adult, and they had a gathering of that at a school where they showed some of my films, and this grand old man of Allahabad, as he was called, hum unko Munnan Chacha kehte the, and his name was Ziaul Haq, and he said, no, but I came before that Ziaul Haq, because he was older than that military dictator. So we called him Munnan Chacha, old family friend, and his family never left for Pakistan. I mean, his whole family went, but he didn't go, and he introduced me as Allahabad ki beti at that gathering. And I felt choked up, and when I saw the area, it was so important for me to go see my father's village, my grandmother's village, the Ganga Jamna, where just that whole area, the guava, the amrud over there, the gende ke phool over there, like everything, the college that my father and his brother went to, things like that. So there's something about the past, and my father's friend Eric Rahim, he's an economist now in Glasgow, and he said that you have to look back in order to look forward. You have to looking, so like you have to, that's why the book that I've been writing, I haven't been able to finish it because I've been looking back, because it's supposed to be about contemporary Pakistan from my view, but I can't do this now without digging into the past and seeing where they came from. And what you said about the partition, it wasn't like a clean, like, okay, now it's partition, and it was a gradual partition. Like my mother's family came in the late 50s. My father came in 48. His family came in 49. I mean, it was beyond that immediate few months of bloodletting at the borders. There was a lot of movement after that. So I just wanted to say that I resonate with that, and I think that is also very true. That what Sammy said, that it's you are taking the culture, you take it forward, and I'm so it's so sweet that you didn't know about Ajrak, because that's so much part of our culture. And I'm not a Sindhi by birth, like I'm a Sindhi by birth, but not by ethnicity. But I identified. I have so many Ajraks, and this time when I went to the press club. This time when I went to the press club in Karachi, this
Same here.
journalist who's Sindhi came and met me, and he ceremoniously presented me an ajrak. And that's what people do when you go, like they ceremoniously present ajraks.
Yep.
That was the first time that I had ceremoniously been presented with an ajrak.
I
But-
suddenly felt really spoiled that I grew up with ajraks in my
Yeah.
house and
Yeah.
buying them all the time.
Why did
Honestly,
you not
like
know?
I
Why-
actually
why
like
was-
there was a
yeah.
part of me that I felt very privileged that Sunana, you were never able to experience that. And here I was, just because my family's from Karachi, I had exposure to that. But I'm not Sindhi, right? So like, and I think Bina, I relate to you on that same
okay.
level where our family, came,
I just
we were
kind of assumed
Muhajirs
you were
as well.
Sindhi. I just kind of assumed that I didn't even know where you're from. Okay.
So the to add to Sanana's story and disconnect with the Ajrak and the Sindhi identity and all of that, and now having been on both sides, I came across the Ajrak for the first time when I met a Sindhi Pakistani in my life for the first time, which was in high school. I was a senior in high school. I met a Sindhi Pakistani, which to me was a phenomenon. And he comes up to me and he says, I'm Sindhi. And I said, dude, your language doesn't sound Sindhi. Like, what are you speaking right now? It sounded so foreign because we speak a different Sindhi than they do in Sindh. So, and he was like, no, I'm from actual Sindh. And then as I got to know him, one day he said, I think like within the first day or two, he said to me, he came to college to celebrate his Sindhi identity. So he wore a topi. And he's like, so what do you think? And I'm looking at him like, you look like an idiot. Like, what are you wearing? This is New York. And he says to me, are you kidding me? He looked at me like I just insulted the hell out of him. He's like, what is wrong with you? This is a Sindhi topi. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. I'm
So he
sorry."
hadn't been born there. That boy. He had come from Pakistan.
Yeah, he was brand new. He had only been in the country maybe a couple of months when I met him.
Okay.
So he was very much Sindhi Pakistani, right? So and he's wearing the topi and he was very offended. Ki like, ye kya tumne keh diya? And I'm looking at him like, guy, I don't get it. And he's like, this is the Sindhi identity. How can you not? You calling yourself a Sindhi? You should be ashamed of yourself. And then because I explained to him, I was like, I'm first of all was born in India. Secondly, I'm raised in America. This completely is not a part of my identity. Not only that, I don't even understand the Sindhi that you're speaking. So how about that? Like, this is our disconnect right now. So he looks at me and he's like, all right, well, I have a gift for you then. So the next day he brings me my very own ajrak and topi, okay, and hands it to me. And then I put that up. And as soon as he handed it to me, because I had, similar to Sanana, not ever seen an ajrak before. As soon as he hands it to me, I felt like I had gold in my hand. And I couldn't understand why this was meaning so much. I'm just looking at it and I'm like, okay, it's nice, but it's not that nice. Why do you feel so special to hold this? So then I went and I put it on my wall, never wore the thing. I put it on my wall and I hung it up like those things that you get in Goa with that, like, you know, that beadwork and all of that.
Wall hanging.
Yeah, the wall hanging. So I hung it up on my wall and it stayed there for years. And everybody who would come in would be like, how did you get that? Like, if they knew what it was, they'd be like, how do you have that? And then I would have to explain to them, like, my run-in with this Pakistani Sindhi, which, by the way, the friendship didn't last very long, but he did leave me a part of my identity, which was very interesting. But yeah, and then when I came to Pakistan, I realized really how much a part of the identity it is. Like, every Sindhi wears a ajrak and a topi with pride. Women wear like salwar kameez made out of ajrak with pride, and it's like, oh my God, this is my like honor.
You know, I don't know where to buy it in the US though.
Oh, don't worry, I can send you
No,
all of
you
that
can.
information.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you have 4 people here that can share that
Yeah,
with
we'll
you now.
bring you, Ajrak. We're going
Oh,
to
cool.
send.
Thank you.
And as we're talking about this, I would love to hear from Bina too. Bina, what sort of has been your motivation? So, Amin Kiasha, tell us a little bit about yourself. How does the partition play a role in your life?
Yeah, so well, as I just mentioned, because I grew up in a family that had come from India, I grew up in this big old house, which still comes in my dreams. And I knew, I mean, this was part of our consciousness growing up, that these houses that were allotted to my father's family, that this house was built by Hindus who moved, that these 3 houses were built by Hindus who had moved to India. I grew up with this consciousness. And my family, unlike a lot of people who carry that hatred and pass it on to their children, my family never had that. And my family was a very open-minded, liberal family. And my grandmother was Purbi speaking. My dadi was Purbi speaking. So like Geet's dadi spoke Sindhi, my dadi spoke Purbi. I mean, I don't speak Purbi, but I grew up with, like understanding that lehja, that the way that she spoke, my dadi. And and gradually realizing that transition that had happened before partition, of my grandparents being originally rural people who had come into the city there, and then their children, my parents, and had gone to school, college, and there had been this massive change, this at the speed of lightning. They had seen electricity come in, they had seen the telephone come in, they had seen, and my mother, because she had been 15, she was 15 when she moved, when her family came to Lahore from Pratapgarh. So she actually didn't even read Urdu, because when they were given the choice in school whether to learn Hindi or Urdu, she chose Hindi because she said it was easier. So she didn't read or write Urdu, but of course she taught herself very fast. And she used to speak जिस तरह से बोलते हैं लोग उधर कि हमने ये किया, हमने वो किया, for yourself, first person plural. So this was not the royal. So we at one time we used to think this is like, oh, very arrogant. This is the royal we, hum. But actually, it's not the royal we, it's the humble we. It's like you don't want to put yourself first. So one poem that she told us, she said that what is it? Bakri jo maina jo मैं ना करे, बकरी जो मैं करे, खाल अपनी खिंचवाए, मैना जो मैं ना करे, नित नित चूरी खाए. So the goat that goes meh, me will get its skin pulled, and the mena that doesn't say meh na kare, will get delicious food to eat, because that mena is not being arrogant and saying meh. So it's not mena, is meh na kare. So so we, and then in the 90s, 80s, 90s, there was this whole thing about muhajir, that, and it became a bad word, and like we felt like we were imposters, we felt like we were, but the thing is, my family never bought into muhajir politics. Like I said, they were progressive people, and they never bought into ethnic politics. So while there were people that we knew who were like very much into that ethnic politics, my family wasn't. So my mother, as when we were children, she took us to India a couple of times. And I remember we traveled by train. I remember it was very cold, because we didn't have that kind of cold in Karachi. We went and stayed with her family. We met all kinds of, relatives. And, as children, it's all like, you don't really think about it much, but it somehow kahin na kahin dhas jata hai aapke andar wo, and it comes back later. You know it, you feel it. And so as an adult, when I went to India for the first time, when I was living in Lahore, and I lived in Lahore in a place called Lakshmi Mansion, ironically, also that had been built, that was a part of, it was part of the Lakshmi Insurance Trust, right on Regal Chowk in Lahore. And that's the building, one of those apartments was where Manto, the writer, had lived. So I lived in Lakshmi Mansion in Lahore for about 10, 11 years. And so I was living there when I went to India in the early 90s as an adult for the first time. And then I went again as an adult when in 1995, the PIPFPD was formed soon after that visit of mine to India. So in 1993 or 94, sorry, the Pakistan India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy was formed. And Dr. Mubashir Hassan and Asma Jahangir invited me to be part of it. And I was this young journalist in Lahore, and I was, like very happy to go and, connect and, talk to people there. And every time I went, I'd, take the overnight train to Allahabad. But I do want to say that the last time I went to India in 2013, I took the overnight train to Allahabad. I was scared to say I was Pakistani. I was nervous to say that I was Pakistani on that train traveling alone. But it was fine. But yeah, so that was so I've had this long association with India, Pakistan, peace building, at a personal level, and then, the PIPFPD, and then 10 years after PIPFPD, a little bit more than, almost 20 years. 2010, Aman Ki Asha was launched. So 15 years or something after PIPFPD, Aman Ki Asha was launched. So when they launched it, Times of India and Young Group, I was freelancing in Karachi at the time, and I heard that they're doing something with India and Pakistan. I was like, hey, how come they're not, in calling me to join it and to do something with it? So I said, hey, what's going on? I called up Shahrukh, who was heading it, and he was like, "Arey, aap kahan hai? Aaiye, coffee piye, baat karte hain." And then I went and talked to him, and he was like, "Yes, we're doing this." And he was very excited. We're doing this project, and this is nobody's ever done this before. This is really amazing, and you must get involved. And why don't you come and you run it from here? So I was like, never thought you'd ask. I'm there, I was, like, yes, what do you think I'm here for? So I joined, and we brought out, and this was the first time, and this Aman Ki Asha, what it did was, it made peace. It mainstreamed peace. It made it okay for people to say, I want peace between India and Pakistan, which until then was only between activist intellectual circles.
Yeah.
Suddenly it became, when the Times of India put up billboards in Bombay saying, love your neighbor, okay, huge billboards with like doves flying and, like Pakistan and all. It was like, people's heads light switches turned on, and there's a whole new cape of young people coming up at that time. Social media had just started coming up, 2010, okay, 12 years ago. Social media was coming up, Facebook was coming up, and suddenly there were like, I don't know how many Aman Ki Asha ke naam ke groups on Facebook and pages. So I approached them, and I said, this is a brand name, you can't use it, and if you want to use it, we'd be happy to have you on. Like, but the one that's there now, so the guy who started it, he made me an admin as well. That's the only one that's so it's Aman Ki Asha on Facebook, and I created the Facebook page and the Twitter handle. So basically, I run those myself, but the website, the Jung Group and the Times of India still run. And it's there. And in the first few years, there was a lot of, like joint concerts, literary events, mushairas, Amitabh Bachchan reciting poetry, Gulzar reciting poetry, that beautiful song that Rahat Fateh Ali and Shankar Mahadevan recorded, Nazar Mein Rehte Ho, Jab Tum Nazar Nahi Aate.
Yeah.
And people, it became like, and that's how I connected to so many people I'm still connected to, who were not part of the intellectual, liberal thing, but just ordinary people, like Geet and Samir, who's an entrepreneur, Ruchita, who's a businesswoman, and so many other people who were not part of that. Not elite, I wouldn't say elite circle, because it wasn't elite. They're very down to earth people, but it's a different circle. And so Aman Ki Asha kind of came, as part of all that. It's part of a process. And what we're doing now, South Asia Peace Action Network, takes that further by making it regional. Like we can't just keep butting heads, India, Pakistan. You have to do it on a regional level. And Surena's pain about not being able to visit. So and Geet, when you were there doing the flood relief in 2010, and kitni mushkilon se visa mile the to your visa extensions, how many strings we had to pull, how many hoops we had to run through to stay on and do humanitarian work.
Yeah.
So we are saying there should be a visa-free South Asia where you allow the governments, let people meet, and like in SAARC, like the 2012 agreement, the visa agreement that they had, so people can meet, travel, trade, visit the ancestral homes. Why is there this kind of barbed wire? Why does Ganpat Singh have to apply for a visa from Tharparkar, the Rajput Soda community in Pakistan? They because their marriage is all across the border. That's the only Rajput community in Pakistan, so they have to marry across the border. It is impossible. How do they take it forward? It's he applied for a visa 8 times before he finally got it. And his story is on the website, on the SouthAsiaPeace.com website, in the Sapan News Network tab. But like, it's really, we need to do something to put pressure on, and people who want to like join this campaign to ease visas, it's on change.org/milne do, MILNEDO. If you go to change.org/milne do. So we started this campaign through Aman Ki Asha, but now we're taking it forward through South Asia Peace, through SAPAN. And it's got like 36,000 signatures, but I think we can get millions actually if we really like put our heads to it. Because people want to meet, and the young generation does not want this bullshit. You know, Asma Jahangir once said that if you open the borders, there'd be a flood on both sides of people wanting to go, like the last scene of that film.
Bajrangi Bhaijaan.
Bajrangi Bhaijaan, like Bajrangi Bhaijaan, the last scene. That is the scene that Asma Jahangir had talked about before Bajrangi Bhaijaan was made.
So Bina, bringing together, and not to cut you short, obviously, like I said, I know that you have a plethora of stuff that you can talk about, but just to keep us moving ahead, having spoken to so many people on either side through Aman Ki Asha, what are some common denominators that you think?
Common denominators? The common denominators are that people are human beings, that they are human beings on both sides, that people who say that the people who finger point and say, oh, you do this and you do that, and why should we do this for you, and why should we, there are those, but then the common denominator is humanity. Like Geet, you and Amna are going to Pakistan to help with the floods. You know, Sameer has taken up a collection and people are donating to him, and they want, if people, you know, do you know why on SouthAsiaPeace.com, if you go to the resolution section, there's one about you know, South Asian solidarity for Pakistan's floods. The reason we made that statement, and we linked a document in which we've listed a whole list, a bunch of organizations that we know who are doing good work, including yours, including Life Bridge.
Right, yeah.
The reason we compiled that document and put those links there was to help our friends in India who've been wanting to donate to Pakistan and don't know how, they don't know where to go. You know, every single Indian friend that I've been speaking to has been saying, how can I help? What can I do? And they can't send money directly to Pakistan. So we made this document in which we listed a whole bunch of you know, organizations that people can donate to that is not directly to Pakistan. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah. And to kind of conclude the entire conversation, we're going to pose a question generally to all of us, and then turn by turn we're going to answer it. Sammy, I'm going to start with you. How has the partition narrative impacted your life?
I think majority of my life growing up in the US, so obviously the partition was something that was a little further away from me. And also I was grateful that I had a little bit of time with my grandmother and my parents, and just hearing stories from them. I think that was always part of our everyday normal conversations of what life was like back in India before the partition. I know, for example, like my dadi's side, they used to live in Hyderabad, and they used to live in a very mixed community where Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims and Hindus, like everyone sort of lived very closely together. And same thing with my mom's side. And so it's just, for me, I think that partition now for me means I no longer identify when someone asks me, where are you from? I don't really say Pakistan. I say I'm from Pakistan and India, because I just cannot separate myself from my ancestry anymore. And I think another added layer to that is I got my personal DNA test done, and it's like all North India and South India. So I'm like, listen, Pakistan kuch tha nahi us waqt, right? So like, अगर हम politics अपने दिमाग से निकाल दें थोड़ी देर के लिए, and like just forget के a bunch of men sat down and decided what was going to happen to the fate of this like entire swath of land that just was India for years and generations. I cannot separate myself from India. And I think just learning about the partition over the years and understanding the dynamics of what it meant to be a Muhajir who had to leave their home behind in Pakistan, lose everything, which happened to both my dad and my mom's side of the family. They lost basically everything, came to Karachi with nothing. Excuse me?
India, you mean? Lost everything in India, not Pakistan.
Lost everything in India, came to Pakistan with basically nothing. and to rebuild life. I mean, and then like from there, it's from like the 50s to then moving to the US in like the late 80s. I was joking with my parents. I was like, we've been like immigrants for life. I mean, think about it. You guys were immigrants, then you guys didn't even like live in Pak. We lived in Dubai, we lived in US. Like we literally never actually lived in Pakistan where for the longest period of time. And I think we've been immigrants the whole time.
Yeah.
And I think that even just hearing about the discrimination that they faced by being Muhajirs and being refugees that came from India to Pakistan was really heartbreaking because I'd never realized that that was even going on. I thought it was just, oh, acha Pakistan hai, sare Musalman wahin ja rahe the, which obviously wasn't the case anyway. But the sort of this romanticized version of the partition that you're told, "Gacha, huh, everyone was like just splitting ways and sab idhar ja rahe the," and it's like, no, it's not really like that. It wasn't that simple. And I know like even my parents faced discrimination in Karachi. Like, talk about being a refugee in your own country. Like you are literally कोई कह रहा है कि हाँ आ जाओ यहाँ सारे मुसलमान हैं, and then you go there and you're like shit out of luck because nobody is actually accepting you for even being there. So it's fascinating, and so I wear that immigrant for life badge very proudly. But yeah, what about you, Amna?
My family is, my mom's from Multan and my dad's from a village in Shekhupura. But my nana was a bureaucrat, so my mom, as a teenager, lived in Delhi, and then my dad was in Indian Commission Service, so he was in. They talked about my mom and dad after they got married, lived in Lucknow, Shimla, and my mom talked about that. So it was part of my life. It's like, and my family, like Bina's family, is very progressive, and we were never told anything, but it was in the air. I grew up in 60s, and then it was just like on TV. There's stories about partition, there is animosity, and then in 1971 war, I mean, there was a whole thing about Crush India and all these stories, and then when in school, I never thought of like people's ethnicity, even though Lahore is pretty homogenous. But I remember like I heard somebody talk about somebody who are refugee family and Urdu speaking, so they were always given derogatory names. Upre. And it was a lot more in Lahore. I don't know how it was in Karachi. It's like, Upre, Hindustani. I was probably 9 or 10 years old when somebody said, oh, wo to Hindustani hai. And so I asked my mom and dad, I said, वो कैसे हिंदुस्तानी हो सकते, वो तो यहाँ रहते हैं, वो पाकिस्तानी हैं, they're Pakistani, they're not Hindu. But these are all the terms you grew up with. And they were not even in Punjab, they were not even called Muhajir, they were called Upre, Hindustani, and many other things.
Tilyar, Tone,
Tilyar, yeah.
Tone, Hindustani se.
Tode, yeah.
Tone.
So it's just so sad. And then, and you were talking about Ajrak. I think I was 10 years old. I think I was Sindhi in my past life because I was 10 years old and we went to Karachi and I fell in love with Ajrak. I was like, I used to like hound my mom. I want Ajrak. I want Ajrak. I was a weird child. And Jhumar, you were saying Jhumar. Jhumar is Saraiki dance too. Oh. And then I did Attan with my friends. It's a Pashtun dance. Attan is a lot like Jhumar. So, I mean, I think the hate mongers and the governments and the establishment, they have created hate among us. When I came to America, I was in my early 20s. And I thought that, people used to ask me, are you in residency? Somebody attending would ask me and say, you're Pakistani. I wanted you to meet this guy, but he's Indian. And I would say, why can't I meet this guy or this woman? And they're like, oh, aren't the countries at war? I'm like, I live in America. I'd rather go to their house and eat chapati. Or on Thanksgiving, eat go to a Punjabi's house and eat masale wala turkey, then so I just never thought of this. And I really think the narrative comes from the governments or the establishment or whoever they are. They want to put the hate in us so we don't love each other when we really are the same.
So we don't realize our potential.
Yeah, we don't realize our potential for peace.
Yeah.
Like we would be so much better if we could go everywhere. When I went to India for a conference, my mom had longed for going to India since partition, and I said, Ami, I'll take you to Delhi. And Ami had to get us. Ami had a Pakistani passport, so Ami had to get a separate visa for each city, and it just became such a hassle. And you go to another hotel. I was with my American colleagues, and they say, who's Pakistani here? They can't stay in this hotel because this hotel it was in Agra. This hotel is in cantonment. And it's like, and they're saying, you can stay, but your mom can't. And you don't think about it. So,
But
yeah.
Anna, that's what happened, Abhi, with this 90-year-old woman, Reena Verma, when she went to Pindi to stay. They said, you don't have a visa to stay in Islamabad. She was booked for a hotel in Islamabad. They said, you can't stay there. And then Pindi, the host, the person who was going to have her stay there, lived in a cantonment. They said, you can't. 90-year-old woman, yeah, for God's sake.
Yeah, my mom was in her late 70s.
Yeah.
And then later, my mom and I went and stayed in another hotel. And then later on, my colleagues who were staying in their rooms, they said, oh, the manager and the police came to our rooms and made the excuse that, oh, there was some break-in. So they were checking for my mom. And then from then on, they all called my mom Ammi because I called her Ammi, and they all started calling her Ammi the terrorist.
So ridiculous.
I know. So that's my thing about it. What about you, Geet?
My partition narrative. So I grew up in a very anti-Pakistan, anti-Muslim home, which is, I guess, not too far from the truth for a lot of us, right? And I heard all sorts of slangy talk about Pakistanis and Muslims in general. And I was jaded by that. I obviously, because I'm growing up in that environment, I'm thinking the same things, like there must be some truth to this stuff. And then we were, it was always reinforced with stories of loss, great loss, and being kicked out and losing all of your identity and whatever, intertwined into the partition story, right? Like, oh, we had to leave with nothing, with the shirts on our backs, and then we had to go and struggle and start from scratch. And similar to Sammy, I realized a little while ago that since partition, we've basically been immigrants. My grandparents weren't born in India. They migrated. My parents were the only generation ever born in India. And then now in America, we're the first now on the second generation. So we have a generation that was born in America, and then they're having kids. So it's now the second generation. So this is the first place that we're actually being able to call home, which is so far from home and so removed. And it wasn't until I went to Pakistan in 2010 myself, when I went to the land of Sindh, that I realized how much language makes you feel at home. Just the fact that you're able to speak the same language to someone that you know. I didn't know this woman from Joe. She was a poor, old, elderly woman, and she was talking to somebody who couldn't communicate to her in Sindhi. And suddenly they reach out to me and they're like, can't you communicate in Sindhi? Why don't you tell her what I'm trying to say? And this was a Pakistani national. So it was like living in Pakistan, couldn't communicate with each other, and me, this American born whatever, coming to Sindh to speak in Sindhi. It was just so bizarre, the experience, like how connected we can feel from language. And then slowly how that place became home, and how the very first time somebhi referred to me as Sindh Ji Dia, the daughter of Sindh. And I was like, that is so bizarre. I had to come all the way here to be called the daughter of Sindh. So, and it makes you feel so like, I guess this is more identity than anywhere else I've felt. Because in America, I was always called a Hindu dot. In India, I was called a Pakistani. Like in America, I was like confused. Why are you doing all of this stuff? And I was like, well, I don't know the answer to this. But then slowly we start to realize how growing up, we used to practice Sikhism, some weird version of Sikhism, which we didn't wear the pagadi, but we used to bow to the Guru Granth Sahib. We had that in our temples, and people would tell us that we were wrong for doing that because we're not Sikh. I go to Sindh and I find out that Sindhi has a whole caste of Nankis who actually practice Sikhism. And it wasn't until I went to Sindh to realize that. The intertwining of our religion, the practice of Hinduism of Sindhis, is very different from the practice of Hinduism otherwise. Like, for example, on our Jhulelal Kaberana, which is not a Hindu god, Jhulelal is a Sindhi god purely, we sing Lal Jhulelal, 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 right? And we sing Damadam Mast Kalandar. Damadam Mast Kalandar celebrates Sevan Ja, Sindriya Ja, Sakisha Baz Kalandar. Who is that? How many Sindhis have actually questioned who that is? Because that's Lal Shahbaz Kalandar from Sevan, who is a Muslim, and we're celebrating him in a Hindu temple every month, multiple times a month. This is the Sindhi identity, right? So these little things are the way that I was impacted by partition, and it was after my experience living in Sindh and in Pakistan for the 2.5 years that I did that I recognized how fractured we are, how far removed. And I feel like I was privileged enough, fortunate enough to meet all these wonderful people that we are all here right now, amongst a few of them and many, many, many more through the work that I did. And it's amazing to have the two of you here today. It really is. Because it brings together, I believe, the partitions, the unfortunate fracture that partition created and the potential that we have if we were to get over this stuff. Just people-to-people contact. Let the governments do what they're doing, but at least we can have this conversation. At least we can have this dialogue.
I think what's really nice is, Bina, what you shared, that is such a huge narrative change, just that was driven from meet your neighbor. I see a very similar, I suddenly saw a similar thread to when, gay marriage was legalized here in the US. That was a huge narrative change because it suddenly wasn't about, are you with a man? Are you with a woman? It was about love. And so it's really fascinating to see that such a huge narrative change can actually really change the momentum of that movement as well. And I'm just kudos to both of you, to you, Bina, and to you, Sinena, for just doing the work that you do. All of us sort of reflect on our partition in our own ways. And I think you two have beautifully identified two different ways that we can also address and look at the partition with activism, with, sort of the writing, poetry. Amna, you are a very great poet as well among us. Thank you. But just the fact that it's really fascinating to be here and see the different sides of the partition and the ways we've been able to sort of digest and then also go, okay, what do I do about this now?
And just to bring this up, and I know it's a complete aside and you guys might get mad at me for bringing this up, but I know one person who's going to totally support me on this. I was so happy to see Miss Marvel.
Yeah,
Yes.
same.
I was so happy because I feel like Miss Marvel is something, the partition story is completely underrepresented. I mean, it's considered the biggest mass migration, and yet we don't have movies about it. We don't have these phenomenal books, sagas talking about it. We barely have TV shows about it. Maybe one token Dastan drama from Pakistan and maybe one token Hindi movie somewhere, right? And it was wonderful in modern day today, being able to see and having something like that children can relate to, that talks about the partition in such a beautiful way that a lot of people were upset by it because of the way that they say the partition was depicted by the grandmother. But I was super impressed by it. Bina, you're saying that there were some amazing novels and stories. You can share that now if you want to.
Oh, no, there's just been I think I forget the name of that amazing. There've been some amazing, but you're right. Miss Marvel is there's been a big gap in that time between the time we had those, like, the Manto stories are all, around that time.
Yeah.
Kuratul and
Kuratul and,
Heather.
yes, Kuratul and Heather, and that amazing Garam Hawa. And then there've just been there has been a lot of wonderful literature around partition, but that is really, as you're part of an much older generation. So this, as you said, Geet, really brings it. And by the way, Samina Ahmed, who's plays the grandmother, who's
I love her.
Yeah, so in the link I just shared, the Sapan promo, so she has there's a little clip of hers in there as well.
So I'm going to share that.
Share that.
Yeah, I'm going to share that also.
Yeah, please do share that around. That's just a little promo that we made, like talk to a whole lot of people about this narrative change, the need, why South Asia, why friendly relations in South Asia, why should South Asia be like EU or like in like Canada, America? Why is it like North and South Korea? Is that what we're aspiring to be?
So Nana, I'd like you to add a little bit about your narrative, if you will. I'm sorry, we skipped over you, but I would love to hear it.
Mine, I really don't know why it was like this, but both my parents, like, maybe they were in survival mode. They were pretty busy, and with my mom being a working woman, she would come home. Her priority was my homework, not for me to connect with my roots. I've been going to the Jhulelal Mandir in Ulhasnagar from Bombay pretty much every year. But other than that, I don't think she did anything specific to teach me anything about Sindhi. It was like, learn English, do your math, get good marks in history, geography, and keep that up. And that was it. So like I said, the only person who spoke about Sindh, he spoke about the sand, about the henna, about so many small things that I don't remember unless I read. I'm like, oh yeah, I know, I've heard this. So was my eldest Chacha, and and I think I am influenced by him in many ways. And he, I can't say he was very progressive. He was 13 years old when he came, and he was scared. He was petrified that the ship would sink. It was like, it's a building on water. How is the building floating on water? He was so naive. And when he came here, I remember this clearly now, because Saz asked me, why did he not ask if compensation was received? It seems I came from school one day and I read in some history book that everybody got compensation for the land they left. And I came home and I asked him, did you get compensation? He said, I don't know. And then Saz was, she was trying to figure out because she wanted to write the narrative. And I said, there are many things I can think of. One is that probably because it was pretty nominal, that he didn't understand if it was like a big thing, he didn't remember. Second, he was so busy working. He was the eldest son in the family. He retired when I was born, like maybe a year, and he came to stay with us and he took care of me when both my parents were working. So, but he had, he used slang, like how Geet mentioned. So the only thing I have heard are like slight slangs about the other culture. But other than that, I have always been taught that love comes first and love will win. My best friend is a Muslim, like I've known her since ages. And it's a coincidence that my husband's best friend is also a Muslim. And we both know what it means to our families. My mom, a little digress, but when I was in Connecticut before we moved to Maryland, I didn't find a single Indian there. And I was okay with that, because for me, just that if I can speak in Hindi with someone, I'm happy. And Connecticut has a very less this South Asian population. At least it was 6 years back. But I made a lot of Pakistani and Bangladeshi friends. And after half an hour of talking to them, I completely forgot they were Pakistanis or Bangladeshis or whatever. It didn't matter after that first half an hour of that awkwardness. Once it was gone, and once we realized we're in the same boat, it didn't. But I told my mom once that they have arranged for some god barai for me and things like that, and she said, "Sambhal ke rehna." I said, "Why?" And that is when it struck me that though she's never said anything against anybody or any culture, but it is there in her. But luckily, it didn't get translated to me. And now, staying in America, in this part over here, I have a very good friend of mine. Her name is Mariam. I'm sure she listened to this. And because I know English fluently enough to speak with other Russians and other cultures, um, I see myself slightly different from North Indians and also South Indians. South Indians are very hardworking, and they concentrate on their kids. North Indians I've seen mostly they are also very hardworking, but they also concentrate on their kids. And for me, it is different because I'm like, इसको ना culture में डालना है, इसको art करवाना है, इसको ये करवाना है. I end up with very few kids who will accompany me to go for these free events of art and craft. But Mariam takes. And that is how I met her, and that is how I realized there's so much similarity. Only difference is that she's a Muslim, I'm a Hindu. Other than that, we are so much alike. Oops. Oh, sorry, my Roomba started. Where do I go back to?
Hindu and Muslim, only difference.
Okay. So the only difference between me and Mariam is that she's a Hindu and I'm a Hindu and she's a Muslim. Other than that, I think she could be my soulmate, like my soul friend or something. We are so much alike. So, this is where I am, and I think I'm becoming more spiritual as I'm getting white hair. So. I really don't see any difference. And I really pray. I have a poem on that too, but I really pray that just those few men, like one of you mentioned, just those few men decided something. And
so, sorry, can I just say something that Sunaina said, something that I want to just you talked about your closeness to people who are not from your religion. And this is kind of brings me to what, Geet was asking, what is in there in common between the people that I come across? The common humanity, the realization that, that your primary identity is not religion, it's your humanity or whatever. But, I realized when I read this book, The Heart Divided by Mumtaz Shah Jahan, it's a novel. It's a fictitious thing, and it's written by Mumtaz Shah Jahan, who's from a prominent political family of Lahore. Amna, you might have heard of that family, the Shah Jahans. And she anyway, so it's a novel about two sisters, primarily two sisters and two families, a Hindu and a Muslim family in Lahore pre-partition, and the discussions that happen and how the changes that happen, how one family becomes more Congress, one family becomes Muslim League, and one sister decides to stay with Pakistan, one sister decides to be with India. So the heart divided. But the realization that hit me, that I had not thought about before I read this book, which I read some years ago, was like you were saying, like that camaraderie between the families, between you exchange sweets, you like live like brothers and sisters or like close friends, and you like you said, she's like your soulmate, things like that. But in that time particularly, and maybe not so much now, but that time particularly, there was an answer. And I hear this from my grandparents also. Oh, we celebrated all the festivals together, we shared our sweets, and we sent mithai to their house, and they sent vagara, vagara, vagara. Fine, yes. But the unspoken thing was, you do not marry into the other side.
Yeah.
You do not marry. And by the way, that is not just Hindu and Muslim. By the way, that is not just Hindu and Muslim. That is caste. It's a caste and class thing. It's a caste and class thing. We make it about religion, but it's not. How many women are killed in Haryana because they go, go with somebody who's not of their caste, and how many men are killed because they go with somebody who's not of their caste or class. And why is it called in India, it's being called quote unquote love jihad? And it's a natural progression that as communities get close, as they assimilate, then those unwritten rules no longer matter, and then people, like, because that's who you come into contact with. In Pakistan right now, there's a big thing about forced conversions. And yes, some of them certainly might be, but a lot of it is simply access. You're in school with so and so, you're working so and so. There was this doctor, she was in her 30s, Hindu woman, Hindu female doctor, and she married a Muslim, and there was a hangama, and they said forced conversion and this, and then there was a police case. She was brought back, he was brought back, and she said, "Bhai, I want to marry this guy. This is the guy I want." And then she was in her 30s.
Yeah, it's a love marriage.
This was in Pakistan.
Yeah.
This was in Pakistan. But but what I'm saying is that it happens as there is access, as there is greater assimilation between the communities, romantic relationships will form. And so that unspoken dividing line gets blurred, and it threatens, it causes the people who are threatened, they want to keep those racial, ethnic, caste, class borders, they want to keep those lines clear. Those lines are getting blurred, and these people need to know that they're on the wrong side of history. This will change. You're seeing this in America. You're seeing this.
Yeah, you're seeing it here.
So this is, and because they are so threatened, then they do everything they can to stop it, and they resort to violence, even if it comes to killing their own children.
I want to say something that we don't even realize how intertwined we are, even though we lived in separate countries. That, Geet was talking about, I went to her, in New York, I went to her cousin's Sangeet. And then I saw all these Hindus going crazy, dancing, Ali da pehla number, Ali dam dam de andar. I don't even realize what they're dancing to. And the same thing with us. Like, there are so many customs we have that have nothing to do with Islam. That is our culture. Like when in Punjab, when the new bride comes into the house, we used to pour oil at the threshold before she steps foot in the house.
Yeah,
so
the
it brings.
Gujaratis break a coconut.
Yeah.
But Kamna, what I want to sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say this one thing, that just because they are not Islamic doesn't make them anti-Islamic.
Right.
I just want to make this very important point.
And also, it's because this is our culture. We're not Arabs. We're South Asians.
Yeah.
That's why,
right.
like Sammy,
right.
I've started to call myself South Asian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's who I am.
And that's why we still say Khud Hafiz. Okay, stop it. For Sunaina, who doesn't know that, there's this big Arabization there's this big Arabization of like Urdu that's happening in Pakistan, where they're turning things that are actually
in India also, by the way. In India also.
Because all the Muslims have to prove they're Islamness.
Yeah.
So they're
I think
trying
this is
to
happening pretty much everywhere
Islam
is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Outside
South
of like
Asian
the
is-
Arab countries. Yeah.
South Asian Muslims for sure. I can't speak
Yeah.
for everybody, so you're saying it's everyone.
Yeah.
But like
yeah.
they're changing it from like Khud Hafiz is the way that everybody used to say goodbye. And while I was still there, and very soon after I left Pakistan, it started to change to Allah Hafiz, and I was like, what is this Allah Hafiz? This
It
is very
doesn't
weird.
exist. Allah Hafiz doesn't even exist in Saudi Arabia.
And all of the Pakistanis or Indian Muslims that are here referring to Ramzan as Ramadan, which to me is hilarious because we have a Z, right? We have the letter Z, and Arabi people don't have the letter Z, so they pronounce it DH. Right. And so now Indians and Pakistanis have started calling it Ramadan, and I'm looking at them like you're a moron because
that's been brought in by the corporate culture, Keith, because you had the one that you had the KFCs and the Pizza Huts and the McDonald's and all, and they started doing because they were advertising in English, and in English because they get it because their corporations and they're all over the Middle East, and they were there in the Middle East, and the Middle East is really big on all these chains. So in English it's Ramadan, right? But in the Urdu script, it is still written Ramzan.
Ramzan, but it's not pronounced Ramzan, no? That's why
Yeah.
it's funny.
No, it's pronounced when you're
And
reading it from
Roman
Urdu,
script,
yeah.
we wrote it with a Z.
Yeah.
It was
Yes,
Ramzan.
that's right. It is
Ramzan, exactly.
So, yeah.
Sunena might know this.
Anyway.
Sunena, do we have a Z in Hindi?
We do, but you know what the funny thing about this Ramadan thing is, in my community, there's a clubhouse and that had a Eid party or something. And they had written it Ramadan.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
In
Yeah,
America,
here they do.
In America, it's all Ramadan because they get it from the Arabs, so they get Ramadan. But it's funny about the Z because you call the spice, you call it Jira, and Mr. Jinnah, you call Zina.
Yeah. No, and we also call there, and then there's a weird way in Zevar जो कहते हैं ना, Zevar कहते हैं लेकिन Javeri Bazaar कहते हैं. It's Zaveri Bazaar, bro. And it's funny if you look at it's slightly fundamental in India too. Very fundamentally Hindu people don't like pronouncing the Z. I've also noticed that, which is probably the unsaid thing, but they don't like pronouncing the letter Z, so they'll purposely call it like Javeri and things like that. It's very funny. I mean,
I think it's a dialect thing. Like,
okay.
Also,
see, the thing is, like initially Beena said, let me know if you can't understand Urdu. I'm a Mumbaikar. मेरे को गुजराती भी आती, मुझे हिंदी भी आती, मुझे मराठी भी आती, मुझे फर्क भी नहीं पता. Like, I know the difference between Marathi and Gujarati, but Hindi, Urdu, it is all good to me. I can understand everything. In fact, if I pay attention to some Tamilian speaking, like if I really focus, I might understand the context.
Yeah.
So
Sunena, in closing, we'd like to have you read one of your lovely poems.
I have my second last poem, which is perfect, and it's a good way to end. So it's a very short poem. Most of my poems are like 3-4 lines each. Let's start with the poem. When I told my son about the India-Pakistan fight, he asked me, who won? Who won?
Wow.
And my son is 6.5 years old, and what's the beauty in it is that his question was so genuine. He really wanted to know who won the fight. He's a 6.5-year-old. For him, if somebody's fighting, somebody has to win. I was like, sweetheart, that question again, it stirred something in me, and I quickly wrote it down, and I told Saz, that this is a new poem, and I wanted to go in the end, and I really want to finish this book on the note that who won? No, we have all lost.
Beautiful.
Beautiful poem. Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please visit our website at aurate.com if you'd like to purchase Sunena's book, or if you'd like to learn more about the South Asia Peace Action Network. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at 3aurate to stay updated on our work. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.